Hi, thank you so much for being here. I've got a new story for you, and this one, the character finally makes the right choice. Let's listen.
My parents demanded my 19-year-old daughter give her lazy cousin $67,000 because her success embarrassed the family and made her cousin look bad. I didn't stay silent. I stood up and said this. 5 minutes later, the whole family lost it. Sunday dinner at my parents' house started with pot roast, green beans, and the kind of fake calm that only exists right before somebody says something outrageous. My mother waited until plates were half empty, then reached beside her chair, pulled out a glossy brochure, and slid it across the table to my daughter, Valeria. Preston's college program starts in the fall, she said, smoothing the paper with both hands. Private housing, coaching, placement support. It's exactly what he needs. Valeria looked down at the cover photo of brick buildings and smiling students in blazers. My father took a sip of iced tea and added, "He's had a rough couple of years. This is his reset." Then my mother tapped a line printed near the bottom of the page. Tuition, housing, fees, total due. "We only need one thing from you," she told Valeria in that soft, practiced voice she used when she wanted to make a demand sound like a blessing. $67,000. I set my fork down so carefully it barely made a sound. Valeria didn't move. Preston smiled like somebody had already handed him the receipt. That was how the number entered the room. Preston didn't even wait for Valeria to answer before he leaned forward and started selling his own future like he was already on campus. My nephew Preston was 21, chronically unemployed, and suddenly full of language he had clearly memorized from the brochure. "It's not just classes," he said, flipping to a page with glass buildings and people in business casual. "It's access, connections, recruiters, mentors, people who can actually open doors." My brother Andre sat beside him, nodding like his son had been invited to Harvard instead of some expensive private college program none of the rest of us had ever heard of until that night. Preston pointed at a list of industry immersion weekends and laughed. "Honestly, this is exactly the kind of reset I deserve. I just need the chance." Then he looked straight at Valeria and said, "And for you, this isn't even a big hit. It's family helping family." He said it casually, like he was asking to borrow a charger, not claim a year's worth of savings from a 19-year-old cousin. My mother smiled at that. My father didn't correct it. Nobody at that table acted like the money belonged to Valeria at all. He was already spending it out loud. What scared me wasn't yelling. It was the fact that Valeria did none of the things I expected. My daughter had built a small software business while finishing school, and she was usually quick, funny, and impossible to corner. But now she just stared at the brochure with one hand wrapped around her water glass so tightly her knuckles lost color. Her shoulders had gone still. Her face had gone blank in that careful way people get when they're trying not to say the first true thing in their head. My father mistook that silence for openness. "You don't have to transfer it tonight," he said. "We can work out the details this week." Andre gave a little shrug and added, "It's not like we're asking a stranger. We're talking about your own cousin." Valeria looked up at him, then at my mother, then back down at the brochure again. She swallowed once and said nothing. That silence hit me harder than a slammed door would have, because I knew exactly what it meant. She wasn't calm. She was trying to line up loyalty, gratitude, and shock fast enough to breathe. Around the table, they read her restraint as weakness. They thought she was folding already. My mother reached across the table and laid 2 fingers over Valeria's wrist, like she was comforting her through some generous decision. "Sweetheart," she said, and the word came wrapped in honey so thick it made my jaw tighten. "After everything this family has done for you, wouldn't it be beautiful to see you give something back?" My father nodded at the exact same moment, like they had rehearsed the timing. "Nobody is saying you owe us," he added, which was how I knew that was exactly what they were saying. Preston leaned back in his chair and looked toward the ceiling, as if he were graciously trying not to seem too excited about being rescued. Andre picked up the brochure and turned it toward Valeria again. "This could change his whole life," he said. "You understand opportunity better than anybody." My mother squeezed Valeria's wrist once more. "We all poured into you," she said. "This is what family does." Valeria almost nodded, and that scared me more than the number had. I had heard that voice all my life. It was the voice she used when she wanted theft to sound like love. Then I saw the worst part happen right in front of me. Valeria's expression shifted, not into agreement exactly, but into guilt. She looked at the brochure again, then at my parents, and I watched the old story come up in her face before she even spoke. "I mean," she said quietly, "you all did help me a lot." My stomach dropped so hard I felt heat rise behind my eyes. That was the lie they were leaning on. That was the debt they thought they had built. My father spread his hands like the reasonable one in the room. "No pressure," he said. "We just thought you'd understand what it means to invest in family." Preston laughed under his breath and said, "And honestly, you're the success story. You get it." Valeria still wasn't agreeing, but she was doing something worse. She was trying to be fair to people who had never once been fair to her. My mother saw it too. I could tell by the way she relaxed back into her chair and let her voice go almost tender. They thought Valeria still believed in the version of this family they had sold her for years. They thought gratitude would do the rest. They were counting on a debt they had never paid. My chair scraped the floor before I fully realized I was standing. The sound cut across the room so sharply that even Preston stopped moving. I put both hands on the table and looked straight at my daughter first, not at any of them. "Before you give any of these people a single cent," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt, "there's something you deserve to hear." My mother's face changed immediately. Not guilt. Alarm. My father set his glass down. Andre frowned like I had broken some unspoken rule. "Abigail," my mother said, smiling too fast. "This is not the moment." I didn't sit back down. "Actually," I said, "this is exactly the moment." Valeria looked up at me then, really looked, and I could see confusion pushing through the guilt they had just handed her. Preston let out a short laugh. "What, are we doing speeches now?" he said. I ignored him. The whole table had gone quiet in that deep, dangerous way families do when everybody suddenly understands a secret is about to stop being private. Once I started talking, there was no putting any of this back the way it was. When I was 14, my school sent home a form for a science trip to Chicago. It cost $45, and I stood in our kitchen holding the paper while my mother sorted coupons and my father complained about bills. "It's fine," I said before they could even answer. "I probably don't need to go." My mother glanced up and said, "Money's tight right now anyway." And that was that. 2 days later, my brother Andre came home furious because the battery in his car had died. My father drove him to get a new one that same weekend. "He needs transportation," my mother said when I stared too long at the receipt on the counter. Andre got patience when he failed, instant fixes when things went wrong, and another chance every time he wasted one. I got trained early to make myself smaller before anyone had to ask. By the time I was 16, I could kill my own hope in under 10 seconds. "Don't start," my mother would say if I even looked like I might compare. So I stopped comparing out loud. I stopped asking for money. I stopped expecting fairness. In our house, favoritism wasn't dramatic. It was organized. Years later, when Valeria was little and I was raising her mostly on my own, I told myself I could take the old pattern if it bought her something softer than the childhood I had. On Sundays, I packed a diaper bag, drove across town, and carried casseroles into my parents' house like we were arriving to a support system instead of a performance. My mother kept a basket of cheap toys in the den and called it Valeria's Corner. My father let her stir pancake batter and told everybody she had his brains. When rent was tight and I was exhausted enough to cry in parking lots, that version of them was enough to tempt me. Not helpful exactly, just present. "Grandma made cookies," Valeria would say on the drive home, holding a plastic container in her lap like proof that family could be counted in something sweeter than money. I let that matter more than it should have. I let hugs stand in for help. I let birthdays, holiday photos, and loud public affection blur what they were not doing. If being the less favored daughter bought my child the feeling of having grandparents, I told myself I could absorb the rest. I made closeness do the job of fairness. The pattern got impossible to ignore once the kids were older, and the comparisons came with price tags attached. At one July barbecue, Preston rolled into the backyard talking about his new golf lessons while my mother passed her phone around, showing photos from the father-son trip Preston and Andre had taken to Scottsdale. "He needed confidence," she said proudly, as if expensive flights were a medical treatment. Valeria, who was 15 then, stood next to me balancing paper plates and listening without pretending not to. Later that year, at Christmas, Preston got a new drone and a gaming monitor. My mother said he was finally finding his lane. Valeria opened a lavender lotion set, 2 pairs of fuzzy socks, and a card with her name misspelled on the envelope. My father kissed her forehead and told her she was low maintenance, like that was a compliment. When she mentioned a design tablet she'd been saving up for, my mother smiled sadly and said, "Oh, honey, we just couldn't do everything." Then Preston showed us the ski jacket they had ordered him for next season. Valeria thanked them for her gifts. I watched her do it. By then, the difference wasn't hidden. It was curated. One afternoon, Valeria came home from school, dropped her backpack by the kitchen island, and tried so hard to sound casual that it hurt to listen. "Can I ask you something weird?" she said, opening the fridge without looking at me. I was sorting mail and already knew from her tone that something had landed wrong. "Sure," I said. She kept her eyes on the orange juice and asked, "Why did Grandma pay for Preston's summer business thing, but not the coding camp information I sent her?" The question hung there between us with awful clarity. I could have told her the truth in one sentence. I could have said, "Because they do not love giving to you the way they love giving to him." Instead, I wiped down a clean counter just to buy myself 2 more seconds. "Don't worry about that," I said finally. "Your grandparents have been there for you too." She turned and looked at me. "They have?" I smiled, small and steady, the kind of smile mothers use when they are building a bridge they know they should not build. "Yes," I said. "Just differently." She nodded slowly, like that answer filled the hole. It didn't fill anything. It just covered it. A week later, after picking up extra shifts I could barely stand through, I came home with the laptop she needed for her classes and the coding work she had started doing after school. The box sat on the passenger seat beside me the whole drive, and I must have checked it at every red light like it might disappear before I got home. When I carried it into our apartment, Valeria looked up from the kitchen table, saw the logo, and froze. "No," she said, already smiling. "Mom, no way." I set it down in front of her and tried to act like it had not cost me sleep, groceries, and the tiny cushion I had been building for emergencies. She ran both hands over the box like it was something fragile. "Did Grandma and Grandpa really do this?" she asked. There it was. The moment I could have pulled everything apart. Instead, I heard myself say, "They wanted you to have what you needed." Her whole face lit up. She threw her arms around me, then grabbed her phone to text them thank you. I waited until she was turning the laptop on before I walked to the bathroom, locked the door, sat on the closed toilet, and cried as quietly as I could. I called it one lie. It became a system. After that, the lie got easier to repeat and harder to undo. When Valeria got into a weekend coding course, I paid the fee in installments and told her her grandparents had pitched in. When she needed licensed software, I skipped replacing my tires for another month and told her my father had helped cover it. When a summer program opened that I knew could change the trajectory of her whole future, I sold a few pieces of jewelry my grandmother had left me and put that money toward the deposit, the travel, and the housing. The worst part wasn't my own lying. It was what happened after. At Thanksgiving that year, Valeria hugged my mother in the hallway and said, "Thank you for always believing in me." My mother smiled, rubbed her back, and said, "Of course, sweetheart." My father heard it and said nothing. They did not correct her once. Not for the laptop. Not for the course. Not for the program. Every time she thanked them, they let the gratitude land and kept it. By the time she was 19, they had let her build a whole history on money they never spent. Back in that dining room, all those years collapsed into one breath. I kept my hands flat on the table because I needed the pressure to stay steady. Then I looked at Valeria and said the first true thing out loud. "That laptop you got when you were 15? I asked. Her eyes locked on mine. "I bought it after 3 extra night shifts." Nobody moved. My mother opened her mouth, but I kept going before she could get sound out. "The one you thought came from Grandma and Grandpa. It didn't." Valeria blinked once, hard, like she had misheard me. "Mom," she said quietly. My father leaned forward. "Abigail, don't do this," he said. And my brother Andre added, "You're making this ugly for no reason." I didn't look at either of them. I kept my eyes on my daughter. "You needed it," I said. "You earned it. I was not going to let you miss out because nobody else would step up." The room was so still, I could hear the ceiling vent rattling over the table. Valeria's hand slid off her water glass. That was the first brick I pulled out of their story. Once it started, I wasn't willing to stop halfway. "That coding course you thanked your grandmother for?" I said. "I paid for it in installments." My mother let out a sharp breath. "Oh, for God's sake!" she snapped. But I went right over her. "That summer program you thought your grandfather covered. I sold jewelry to help pay for that. The software, the travel, the deposit, all of it came from me." Valeria was staring at me now with the kind of stillness that comes right before the ground changes shape. Andre pushed back from the table. "Why are you making it sound like we did nothing?" he demanded. "Because you did nothing," I said. My father slapped his palm on the table. "We gave support," he barked. "We gave encouragement." I turned to him for the first time. "You gave her the chance to thank you for things you never paid for," I said. "That's not support. That's theft with good manners." Preston laughed once, disbelieving, like he still thought this was recoverable. My mother hissed my name under her breath like a warning. I had spent years swallowing sentences. That night, I said every one of them. Then the room exploded exactly the way cowards always do once a lie gets named in public. My mother called me dramatic. My father started talking over me so loudly I couldn't hear my own next sentence. Andre kept repeating, "That's not the point. That's not the point," as if volume could erase facts. Preston, somehow the most shameless person there, leaned forward and said, "Even if all that's true, what does it change? She can still afford this now." I turned toward him so fast his face actually shifted. "It changes everything," I said. "Because you are not asking for help. You are trying to collect on favors that never existed." My mother pointed at me with a shaking finger. "You are poisoning her against family." I let out one short laugh. "No," I said. "I'm removing the poison you put in first." Then I listed it so there could be no confusion. The laptop, the course, the summer program, the software, the months I came home too tired to stand because I was paying for a future nobody else wanted to fund unless they could pretend it was theirs. By then, nobody could hide behind confusion. I wasn't explaining anymore. I was documenting. Valeria stood up so slowly her chair barely moved. She put one hand on the back of it and gripped until her knuckles turned white, then looked at me, then at my mother, then at my father. "Wait," she said, and her voice sounded thinner than usual. "So none of that was from them?" My mother jumped in first. "That is not what this is," she said quickly. "We loved you. We encouraged you. We were always there. Valeria did not even look at her. Mom, she said to me, still staring. The laptop too? I nodded. Yes. Her eyes shifted to my father. And the summer program? My father gave the kind of answer people use when the truth is fatal. Your mother is being very emotional about old details, he said. That was answer enough. I watched the exact second it landed. Not just that I had paid, not just that they had lied by omission. It was the larger shape of it settling in her body all at once. Every thank you, every hug, every moment she thought she was being backed by grandparents who believed in her. It had mostly been me. The room stopped feeling like a family dinner. It felt like evidence. If Preston had kept his mouth shut, the silence after that might have held. Maybe Valeria would have had one more minute before anger finished replacing shock. But my nephew had been carried for so long he thought entitlement was a personality trait. He threw both hands out and said, Okay, but she still has plenty. Why are we acting like 67 grand is going to ruin her? Andre muttered, Preston, but not in a way that meant stop. In a way that meant be smarter. Preston looked straight at Valeria. Come on. Family helps family. You know how hard it is watching everybody talk about your business like you're some genius while I'm still trying to figure stuff out. Then he laughed, mean and small. You make the whole family look bad without even trying. My mother didn't correct him. My father didn't correct him. That was the ugliest part. They let the truth sit there because he had finally said the quiet part for all of them. Valeria stared at him like he had turned into a stranger right in front of her. She picked up her bag. Don't, I said softly. But I wasn't talking to her. I was talking to everyone else. Too late. Preston had finally said what they had been building toward all night. Before I could get around the table, Valeria was already moving. She grabbed her bag, pushed past Andre's chair, and walked out with her face white and her shoulders tight enough to crack. I heard the front door open, then close, then the silence after it, and that silence was worse than the shouting that came next. My mother stood up first. Look what you did, she snapped. My father pointed at me like I was the only disaster in the room. Andre muttered, This didn't have to happen tonight. And Preston, unbelievably, said, She's being dramatic. I picked up my purse and car keys without rushing, because there was nothing left in that house worth hurrying for except my child. My mother stepped in front of me. You are tearing this family apart over old resentments, she said. I looked at her for one long second, then moved around her. No, I said. I'm ending the part where you use my daughter. My father called my name. I kept walking. At the door, I turned back just once. They all looked stunned, offended, and still somehow certain they were the injured ones. Very quietly, I said, Do not ask her for anything again. Valeria didn't come home for hours. I sat at our kitchen table in the apartment with the overhead light off and the stove light on because bright rooms felt wrong for a night like that. When the front door finally opened, it was almost midnight. She came in carrying her bag, kicked off her shoes neatly by the wall, and went straight to the kitchen without looking at me. No tears, no slammed cabinets. She opened the fridge, took out leftover rice and grilled chicken, and started heating it like this was a normal Tuesday. Her phone kept lighting up on the counter the whole time. My mother, my father, Andre, Preston, then my mother again. The vibration against the granite sounded harsher in the quiet than any ringtone would have. You don't have to read them tonight, I said. Valeria stirred the food once and said, I know. Her voice was calm in a way that scared me. She set the plate down, sat across from me, and finally picked up the phone. She didn't rush. She read each message all the way through, face blank, jaw tight, eating between notifications like her body still deserved dinner even if the rest of the night had gone bad. She was quieter than I had ever seen her. At first, the messages were exactly what I expected from people who had been caught and still thought shame was negotiable. My mother wrote, "This is all a misunderstanding." My father wrote, "You know your mother gets emotional." Andre sent, "Don't let your mom blow this up bigger than it is." Preston wrote a long paragraph about timing and opportunity and how everybody had just been trying to have an honest conversation. Valeria kept scrolling. A minute later, the tone changed. My mother said she was heartbroken that gratitude had turned into cruelty. My father wrote, "We have always treated you like family, which would have been funny if it weren't disgusting." Andre texted, "You know Preston needs this more than you do." Then came the message that ended whatever was left. It was from Preston, and it said, "Ever since your business took off, you've been making the whole family look bad. Grandpa said people ask why you're doing so well while I'm still figuring things out. You could fix that if you wanted." Valeria read it twice, then set the phone down between us. There it was, plain and ugly. She looked at me for a long time after that. Not with the trust she'd had before dinner, and not yet with blame either. More like she was trying to redraw a map she had been using for years and suddenly couldn't trust. Then she pushed the phone away and said, "Tell me everything from the beginning." I asked, "Are you sure you want all of it tonight?" She gave one short nod. "No edits," she said. So I made tea neither of us wanted, and we sat there at the kitchen table under that weak stove light while the apartment hummed around us. I started with being 14 and learning to stop asking. I told her about Andre getting rescued over and over while I got explanations. I told her about Sunday visits when she was small and how badly I wanted her to feel surrounded by family, even if I had to lie to make the picture hold together. She didn't interrupt much. Once in a while she would ask, "When was this?" Or, "Did they know?" And each time I answered yes, because anything softer would have been another version of the same mistake. By the time I reached the first laptop payment, her tea had gone cold. We were finally sitting in the truth with nowhere else to hide. That conversation lasted until the sky started turning gray at the edges of the blinds. It hurt in a clean way, which was almost worse than chaos. When I told her why I lied, I didn't dress it up. "I wanted you to feel chosen," I said, "and I was ashamed that I couldn't give you everything without making it look like it came from people who should have helped and didn't." Valeria pressed both palms to her eyes, then dropped them and said, "You should have told me." "I know," I said. She nodded once. "I'm mad that you didn't." Then she inhaled slowly and added, "But I'm a lot madder that they let me thank them." I showed her the old email receipts I still had. The payment plans, the summer program confirmation, the software subscriptions, every small sacrifice I had turned into a secret so she could feel protected. Around 3 a.m, Andre started calling from an unknown number. Valeria looked at the screen, hit decline, then blocked it. "No," she said, not to me, but to the whole structure of them. By sunrise, the gratitude was dead, and so was their access. Over the next few weeks, Valeria did not make a speech, post anything online, or send some dramatic final paragraph. She just closed the door they had counted on staying open. She stopped answering calls. She returned a birthday gift my mother mailed with no note inside. She removed herself from the family group chat after screenshotting the messages she wanted to keep. When new numbers started appearing, she blocked those too. Andre tried a second front by using other relatives to reach her. One of my cousins called and said, "Maybe just hear them out," and then accidentally admitted my parents were behind on the mortgage and had been assuming Valeria would take some pressure off once Preston's program got sorted. There it was again, the bigger plan under the smaller lie. They hadn't just wanted money for Preston. They had already spent the idea of her money in their heads. Without her, yes, the private program fell apart. The deposit never got paid. Preston, furious for exactly 3 days, got a job at a car rental desk near the airport. My mother's messages turned from offended to pleading. My father's went from stern to clipped. For the first time in years, their emergency stayed theirs. 6 months later, our apartment feels different in a way I still notice when I walk in after work. Calmer, lighter, more honest. Valeria's business is doing better than ever now that she is putting her energy into clients instead of guilt. She moved from freelance coding jobs to a small team that builds custom systems for local companies, and every time she signs a new contract, she tells me first. On Sundays, we make breakfast at home instead of driving across town to perform family. Sometimes we work at the same table in silence, and it feels more supportive than any holiday dinner at my parents' house ever did. As for them, the house they were quietly drowning to keep is gone. Once the money they expected from Valeria never came, the balancing act stopped balancing. They had to sell fast, and even then it wasn't enough to save the version of themselves they liked showing people. I don't say that with joy. I say it because facts matter now in this house. The truest thing I ever told them still stands, and I have not needed to improve on it. You don't get a return on an investment you never made.
Somewhere on the screen should be a link to a different video where I'm narrating my own stories. A lot of them are original stories that I do not post on that channel. So if that's something that you would be interested in, then check it out.